Siglo XX, cambalache, problemático y febril. El que no llora no mama y el que no afana es un gil. Dale nomás. Dale.
Welcome back to another episode of Spanish with Profe Nader. This is part 2 in our look at the Spanish preterite and imperfect tenses. Today we're going to be looking at the Spanish imperfect tense, but more importantly, later on in this presentation, we're going to contrast the two tenses and how to use them. As you recall from part 1, Spanish has two past tenses, where English only has one. Today we're going to look at the Spanish imperfect tense, which is the second past tense in Spanish. And let's first look at how we conjugate it. For Ir verbs, we drop the AR ending, and we have the stem, HABL, and we simply add an ending. And so for yo, we would say yo hablaba. This would be I talked. Tú hablabas. Él hablaba. Nosotros hablábamos. And notice that in the nosotros, that's the one pronoun, subject pronoun, where we do have an accent. Vosotros hablabais and ustedes hablaban. Now for ER and IR verbs, this is kind of a gift because we don't have to learn new endings for ER verbs and a separate ending for IR verbs. They're the same. So let's take the verb comer. We drop the ER. We have our stem, COM. And it's very important here to stress the I, because you'll notice that the I is accented. So we have to stress that and make it its own syllable. So we say yo comía, tú comías, él comía, nosotros comíamos, vosotros comíais, ustedes comían. Those are the conjugations. Now we got some good news. In the entire Spanish language, there are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect tense. So what are they? They're ser, ir, and ver. And I'm not going to repeat how to conjugate or how to say those verbs. They're listed right there. But the good news is there are only 3 irregular verbs. This is very different from the preterite tense, where we had lots of irregular verbs. Okay, let's talk about how to use the imperfect tense. If you learn the rules for the imperfect, you will make fewer mistakes when describing actions in the past in Spanish. Just like in part 1 of my presentation, a good way to begin is by learning the triggers for the two tenses. A trigger is a key word in a sentence that will help you to know which tense to use. So the triggers for the imperfect tense might include words like todos los días, every day, típicamente, usually, muchas veces, or siempre, or mientras. These are words that help you frame the sentence and kind of get an idea of which tense you should use. Now, the best way to learn the Spanish imperfect tense is to contrast it with the preterite tense. So let's also use a memory trick, another phrase. Remember that in part 1, I suggested that you learn SS Ben, which give you some rules and guidelines on when to use the preterite tense. Phrases like that are very useful, especially when we're contrasting the two tenses. So for the imperfect tense, we have another phrase. It's called California diet. What is it? Does it really stand for a diet? No, it just is a phrase that'll help you remember when to use the imperfect tense. You see it on this screen. The C stands for a continuous or habitual action in the past. The A are actions with no beginning or an end. D are descriptions in the past. I or ing, a sentence with ing. E is an emotional or mental state, and T is time and age. Let's go through each one of these individually. First of all, rule number 1, the C in California diet stands for a continuous or a routine or habitual action that was performed in the past. For example, she used to live in Texas. How long did she live in Texas? Not really stated in this sentence, just that she used to live there. Ella vivía en Texas. Or, I used to ride my bike. Montaba mi bicicleta. Whenever we want to say in English, I used to, and we want to say the equivalent in Spanish, we're going to use the imperfect tense. Rule number 2, an action in the past with no reference to its beginning or end. And here we have a trigger word. I always studied my homework. For how long? It doesn't say. always, siempre, means that it was something that kept on happening in the past with no beginning or no reference to a beginning or end. Siempre yo estudiaba mi tarea. I was eating breakfast. Again, an action that was begun but with no specific ending. Yo comía el desayuno. Rule 3, a description. This is actually very important because the description part of it is in Spanish when we wanted to start describing a story. Let's suppose I said, I'd like to tell you a little story. When I was this old, this is what I used to do, this is how things happened. These are all descriptions in the past. We almost always use the imperfect tense when describing actions or things in the past. For example, John was tired. Estaba cansado. He was just tired for quite a while. The car was red. El auto o el carro era rojo. Rule number 4, ing in the past. These are conjugations where we're using a helping verb, like they were playing basketball. It was an action that it was continuing in the past. They were playing. Ellos estaban jugando al baloncesto, or you could even say jugaban al baloncesto. We were singing. Nosotros estábamos cantando, o nosotros cantábamos. Rule number 5, a mental or emotional state in the past. These sometimes get a little tricky, so don't try to overthink it, but you didn't want to go to school. Tú no querías ir a la escuela. You just didn't want to go, and there was no beginning or end of that action. I didn't know they had food on the train. Y yo no sabía que tenían comida en el tren. So these are mental or emotional states in the past with no reference to time. Rule number 6, time and age in the past. These two things almost are their own special little category because whenever we talk about time, like it was 5 o'clock, or age, I was 5 years old, we always use the imperfect tense. We don't ever use the preterite tense. So it was 5 o'clock, eran las 5. I was 5 years old. Y yo tenía 5 años. One of the things I find when I teach the Spanish preterite and the Spanish imperfect tense to my students is to keep these rules or these phrases in mind and apply them to sentences, especially as you're practicing and beginning to understand which tense to use. Also, what I do is an example. I say a good image to have in mind with these two tenses is that the imperfect is like a video camera. Imagine you take your cell phone and you shoot some video of something in the past. That action is recording, and you then stop it, and now you have a little video that's describing something, an ongoing action in the past. That's something like the imperfect tense. For example, let's look at this water skier. Here he is water skiing. We can see that the action is moving, and if this was a past event, we could say something in English like, he would water ski every Saturday. Or when he was young, he would ski a lot. Or he used to ski. Or he was water skiing yesterday, perhaps, when something else happened, like he fell off his skis. So if we contrast that with the preterite tense, taking our cell phone analogy, we use the cell phone and we take a still shot picture. And now that's a snapshot of something in the past. It's not an action that is moving in the past. It's something that kind of is over, and it's just a snapshot of something that we have taken in the past. We would use the preterite tense for something like that. For example, he water skied yesterday. He water skied last week. He water skied all summer long. Again, even though it was all summer long, it's a completed action. We'd use the preterite. Let's take this example of this man skiing in the past when we have an interrupted action. You'll recall that in part 1 of the preterite tense, you remember the phrase SS ben, and the N was an interrupted event. And this is a good example of it right here. We have a man that was water skiing, and then something happened. He fell off. Well, that action was an action that was continuous and ongoing in the past. We were describing it. It's a description. We're using the imperfect tense. And then we have a preterite event that interrupts our narrative. which the narrative being in the imperfect, the interruption is a single action that happens to that narrative, and that would be in the preterite tense. It kind of interrupts this narrative that we're describing. Let's review some of the concepts in this video and some things that you can do to really get good at using the imperfect tense. First of all, study your imperfect tense endings. Review the trigger words, and always remember to use the phrases SS Ben and California Diet. As I said previously in this podcast, if you learn the rule for the preterite and imperfect tenses, you will make fewer mistakes when describing actions in the past in Spanish. It's important to practice. And it's actually very important to practice the imperfect and the preterite tense because this is not something that's natural for you as an English speaker. Spanish speakers grow up with this. They say something or they hear something and they know which tense to use. But for you as an English speaker, you need to practice, and the skill will come as you practice. You'll start seeing patterns and you'll start getting better and better at using the preterite or the imperfect tense, or both at the same time. So let's actually do a few practice sentences. Here are 3 sentences in English. John cleaned his room. John was cleaning his room. John was cleaning his room when she called. The first sentence, John cleaned his room, is really a single action in the past that we're describing. So it's part of SS Ben. Would be a preterite action. John cleaned his room. It's over. John was cleaning his room. This would be the I in California Diet, an ing, or even a description if you prefer. John was cleaning his room. The action was ongoing as you were describing it in the past. John was cleaning his room when another action interrupted that. Someone called. She called him. So this is the classic N in SS Ben. It's an interrupted narrative. The first action, John was cleaning his room, is an imperfect action. And when she called, that interrupted the narrative. That's a preterite action. Let's look at another example. She called me this morning. Now in this sentence we have a trigger, this morning, that frames the time when this action occurred. She called me. When? This morning. This is a preterite action. The next sentence. When I was younger, she used to, or you can almost even use she would call me, because you can say would in English to describe an action that was in the past that was habitual or continuous. When I was young, she used to call me all the time. This sentence is going to use the imperfect tense. When I was younger, which gives us our time, so it's the T in California Diet, age and time are always in the imperfect, and she used to, an action that was habitual in the past, something that was routine, that kept on going. She would call me all the time. This is also imperfect. So both these verbs in this sentence are in the perfect. Let's look at them in Spanish. John cleaned his room. John limpió su dormitorio. John was cleaning his room. John estaba limpiando su dormitorio. John was cleaning his room when she called. John estaba limpiando su dormitorio cuando ella le llamó. She called me this morning. Ella me llamó esta mañana. When I was younger, she used to call me all the time. Cuando yo era joven, ella siempre me llamaba. Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of the imperfect tense, and hopefully this has helped. And as always, subscribe to my channel. You can email me for some grammar packets that I've created that will give you more practice. And of course, there's lots of activities on the internet that you can go where you can practice. And as always, hasta luego. Ciao, ciao.
Siglo XX, cambalache, problematico y febril. El que no llora no mama y el que no afana es un gil. Dale nomás, dale que va, que allá en el horno nos vamos a encontrar. No